The Seahawks officially have a new 10-player draft class. Rob Rang and I are going to be taking our first look at all 10 players and what it means for the Seahawks heading into the 2023 season here on a brand new Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Aloha 12s. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, podcasting here from sunny Hawaii. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks, as always, to all the 12s out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. And I'm going to be a little biased this week to those of you that are here on the islands in Hawaii. Thanks for listening. If you're a Hawaiian Seahawk fan, we greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks have a new 10-player draft class, and Rob and I are going to have our first chance to look at all 10 players, as we always do, going to take a little bit more of a big picture approach, and then we will gradually start really diving into all 10 of these players, especially the 2 first-round picks. The Seahawks very excited about this draft class, in large part because they get 2 premium talents at the beginning of the first round. So we're going to start off today's Monday episode looking at those picks. Rob, looking at the draft as a whole, we'll get to the first rounders here in a second. John Schneider and Pete Carroll, when they were asked for a trait to sum up this draft class, they were both very quick. In fact, John Schneider had to apologize to Pete Carroll because he spoke over him. They were both so excited to answer the question, talking about the one trait that really jumped out to them with this 2023 draft class.
I would say tough. Sorry,
I think toughness.
I think it's toughness and physicality. I think this is a really, from top to bottom, it's a group that's going to really demonstrate that, and we're really fired up about that.
On our tags we have different insignia on there to represent different things, and I'd say just about every one of these guys has a hammer on there, which means that the scout has to say this guy's a legitimate tough guy. So when you look at our tag, all these guys have a hammer on it.
Rob, there's always certain types of players that we've seen John Schneider, Pete Carroll gravitate to. The guys with chips on their shoulders, players that have overcome adversity. They love elite athleticism, and they love their big guys as well. But this year, it really did feel like the toughness aspect of this was really the main ingredient in this entire draft class. As Schneider mentioned, they all had hammers next to them. And so that should get Seahawks fans fired up because that was probably the one thing that was missing most from this football team in 2022, even with a playoff berth.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think, Corbin, if we had to look at the 2022 draft class and use one word to kind of describe it, I think the word that they would have likely used is probably athletic. You think about guys like Derick Hall and even the 2 offensive tackles, Charles Cross, Abraham Lucas, both being sub-5 second flat kind of guys in the 40-yard dash. Ken Walker, the third, 4.3. Derick Hall, of course, 4.2s. You had unbelievable raw athleticism with that class. But yes, I think toughness, grit, perseverance, physicality, whether it be just the physical nature of a player like Witherspoon, the cornerback, the way that Jaxon Smith-Njigba at receiver is able to kind of bounce off of contact and create yardage after contact, after the catch, as we had talked about, that was a huge area of concern. Just the grit, the perseverance shown by Derick Hall just in surviving, frankly. Again, I think there's a lot of things about this class that adds some toughness, some needed toughness to the Seahawks as a whole. And one of the reasons why I'm excited about this group.
Nothing describes the first pick in this draft for the Seahawks at number 5 better than toughness. If you've ever watched the tape, and you don't have to look far, look up any Illinois game, and I guarantee within 3 plays on defense, you're going to be like, who is this 31? With his ability to come up and blast people, play outstanding physical press coverage, this guy is the epitome of toughness. And so it's easy to see why Pete Carroll and John Schneider gravitated to him as one of their top prospects. They said they had 2 guys that they were not willing to trade down for number 5 to select, and one of them was Devon Witherspoon, who Carroll called a rare player. He compared his instincts to Troy Polamalu, which that got me really excited in the media room because Polamalu, in my opinion, is one of the greatest safeties ever to play the game, in large part because of those instincts. And This guy has played football for 6 years. It's not like he's been playing the game since middle school or Pee Wee League. He started as a junior in high school. He was late to the game, and yet you can see those natural instincts on the field. You can see the ball skills, more interceptions than touchdowns allowed his entire college career, top 5 in pass breakups, in passer rating against, in completion percentage against, in all of college football last year, unanimous first-team All-American. I mean, I know there are some fans that are still kind of concerned, why didn't we go to the trenches with that first pick? But Seattle really went with the best player available here, and in their opinion, it was Devon Witherspoon, at least for me. And you know this from our show here the last few weeks. I have no argument against that.
No, exactly. I mean, I got to give you a lot of credit, buddy. I mean, you basically projected this pick. I mean, you didn't put it in your actual final mock draft, which I am thankful for because it gives me a little bit of bragging rights. But you were kind of championing this idea for a long time, just taking the approach that the Seahawks ultimately took, and that being best player available. Because you're right. I mean, in terms of physicality, you know, I think that John Schneider kind of undersold Witherspoon a little bit with just a hammer. I mean, this guy needs a sledgehammer. I mean, he needs just like a tank or something to be the emoji or the symbol to represent his game. And as you said, I mean, he's only been playing the game for 6 years. I mean, previously had focused in on basketball, of course, but it wasn't just the fact that he was the Big Ten Defensive Back of the Year this past season that really impressed me, Corbin. It was the fact that as a freshman, as a 0-star recruit, after focusing most of his time on basketball, that he wound up starting at Illinois. That, to me, just speaks to how instinctive, how physical, how competitive this young man is. And again, one of the reasons why I really think that this is going to be a selection that maybe was scoffed at initially, but I think the Seahawks fans are going to be really, really happy about moving forward.
And you're going to give me credit, which, you know, I'm not somebody to pat my own back, but I have been tooting Devon Witherspoon's horn for about a month as a possibility at number 5. But I got to give you credit with the other first-round pick because you were early on Jaxon Smith-Njigba as a possibility for the Seahawks at pick 20, or even if they traded down from 5, maybe that early in the draft, a guy that had a dynamic 2021 season, hamstring injury held him back last year. But we've talked about it so much up to this point. He was one of the receivers we touched on the most in the pre-draft process. If you're looking for a player that can complement DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, look no further than Jaxon Smith-Njigba with that elite change of direction and acceleration out of his breaks, middle of the field, chain-moving machine. To get him at number 20, the player they viewed as the best receiver in this draft class, they got the best corner and the best receiver on their big boards in 2 first-round picks. And so there's a reason John Schneider was all smiles after the first round, getting these 2 players.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been among the many who have been kind of championing the idea of Seattle really focusing a great deal of attention on the line of scrimmage. So I was as wrong as you possibly can be with the first 2 selections I had for the Seahawks. Of course, I went with Jalen Carter, and the quarterback, Anthony Richardson, of course, wasn't even available to Seattle at 5, much less number 20. So I will fully acknowledge that I was definitely wrong in those regards, but at the same time, I think for the Seahawks, they've got to just be ecstatic about the players that fell to them with Witherspoon again, and then Jaxon Smith-Njigba, because he is such a clean fit in their offense. He does have the ability to come in and play immediately at slot, but also has the size that some of those other dynamic slot receivers like a Zay Flowers, who I also talked about, Jordan Addison we talked about, they don't really have the bulk to be able to slide outside should Seattle ever need Jaxon Smith-Njigba to be able to do that. And so I just really think that these are 2 terrific football players. And because Seattle had the success that they did in the middle and later rounds and getting some of those big, powerful, starting caliber kind of guys, the guys that don't have a great deal of upside necessarily, but are as proven as it gets, 4-year starter kind of guys like Oluwatimi at the center position, with Cameron Young at defensive tackle. Those kind of guys that you should be able to kind of plug and play them. I feel a lot better about the fact that Seattle went the kind of unconventional approach they did in the first round.
And I don't think it was unconventional. Look at last year. They picked the best player available, and that's really what they did this year. And they were still able to get some guys they really liked later in the draft. to take care of some of those deficiencies in the trenches. At least they're hoping these guys will be able to help them do that. And so we're going to get to those picks on day 2 and early day 3. Didn't have a third rounder since they traded down with the Broncos. We'll talk the 2 second rounders and 2 fourth round picks as we continue to take a big picture look at this 2023 draft class here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious snack but don't want all the sugar and calories, then look no further than the Built Bar. 100% real dark chocolate. That's right, 100% real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And that's what's even better. With 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. You can see some amazing flavors there from Rob here on our podcast. And now you don't need to wait to get a box. At home, you can now head to Walmart or your local Sam's Club and get some specialty flavors. Right now, go to Walmart, you can go to the pharmacy section and get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puff. And if you're close to Sam's Club, run in and get a 13-bar box with their hit flavors such as brownie batter puff and churro puff. You can thank me later. You're listening to the Monday post-draft edition here of the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. On tomorrow's Tuesday episode for our everydayers out there, we are going to be breaking down the 2 first-round picks much more in-depth, looking at the depth chart where Devon Witherspoon and Jaxon Smith-Njigba fit with this 2023 Seattle Seahawks roster. So make sure that you are listening in. But let's give some love to some of these other draft picks, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about all 10 of these players. On day 2, the Seahawks with 2 second-round selections, and I think everybody was anticipating after picking a corner and a receiver in the first round that John Schneider and Pete Carroll were going to get defensive tackles or guards and centers. That ended up not being the case at all, though, in day 2, continuing their best player available run. Seattle picks Derick Hall, the edge rusher from Auburn, at pick 37, and then Zach Charbonnet, the running back from Michigan. And tons of credit to Rob because that was one that he actually pegged exactly at pick 52 on Seattle's final mock draft for him. So congrats to you winning this year. I won last year. We'll have our grudge match in 2024. Looking at these selections, let's start with Derick Hall, a player that we've talked about quite a bit with the edge rushers. What I love most is the power that he brings to the table at 255 pounds. This guy plays like a 270-pound edge rusher. You want to talk about a guy that personifies a hammer. That's how he uses his hands when he is bull rushing tackles, and had almost double-digit sacks in the SEC, largely due to his power rushing. That is the strength in his game, and he also can be a very disruptive player against the run. 24 tackles for loss the last 2 seasons alone, playing mostly SEC competition. Those numbers and the fact he had a phenomenal combine and pro day workout, that made him jump out to the Seahawks.
Yeah, exactly. I think when you start to describe a guy and tout his power as an edge rusher, I think there's a lot of Seahawks fans out there, Corbin. You know some of them who are saying, oh, my goodness, here we go. You know, this is the same kind of guy that LJ Collier was. Those are the heavy hands. That means he's a good player. Are you kidding me? I mean, those are one of the most important traits that you're looking for an edge rusher. And certainly he possesses that. Hall possesses that. He also possesses 4.5 speed. And that is something that a player like LJ Collier, for example, has never shown that. He also had 19.5 career sacks against mostly dominant SEC competition. He talked about the tackles for loss, the fact that he was a 4-year starter at Auburn, that he didn't have to go to the Senior Bowl and yet shows that competitiveness to do that. That's what I'm always looking for, is guys that don't have to go to the All-Star game, but still they want to test themselves against the best in the country. And so that, to me, is one of the reasons why I was really intrigued by Hall. Now, I did not have him going to Seattle number 37. I had him as basically like the 48th, 49th best player in this draft class. But still, that's a fairly decent spot of value for an edge rusher. And that I was surprised that Seattle went that direction. As you said, they, a lot of people, myself included, were expecting Seattle to, now that first round was done, now you got those elite players that maybe kind of start checking off some of the boxes for this club. Instead, they stuck to that best player available. And I said that it was unconventional a moment ago, and I meant it, Because Corbin, everybody says we're going to go best player available, but it's amazing how that works out with just kind of checking off the boxes of the biggest areas of concern. I think if we walked into this class, we and I talked about it, receiver, corner, edge rushers were 3 of Seattle's strengths. They truly, truly did take the best player available route, and that is very rare in today's NFL. But I think they got a good one in Derick Hall, a guy that is going to be able to give the club a lot of positional flexibility, can reduce inside, play a little bit. He can also drop back and play some linebacker. I just like him attacking off the edge. I think he could be very effective in that role. We know that Seattle has invested a lot of picks in edge rushers, but that's today's game. And with Uchenna Nwosu and Darrell Taylor both entering the final years of their deals, this gives Seattle a lot more flexibility.
Let's talk the most controversial pick in this draft, because anytime you pick a running back in the early rounds, there's going to be a number of fans that get out their pitchforks and their torches and start throwing a fit. And especially when you drafted a running back in the second round a year before in Ken Walker III. But that's what the Seahawks did with Zach Charbonnet from UCLA, a big-bodied, 212-pound running back. He's got pistons for legs, one of the most productive all-around running backs in college football last year. I'm going to be honest, Rob, I had him ranked in the 70s on my big board. He was my number 3 running back. I just had a pretty big distance between him and Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, my top 2 running backs. Still, I really like him. And Pete Carroll and John Schneider were talking about this. They didn't think he was going to be there at 52 because the top 2 running backs were gone in the first 12 picks, which nobody saw that coming. And so there was a run there on running backs. They wanted to make sure they could get Charbonnet when he was still there at 52. They only had 2 running backs on the roster going into the draft. This guy fits the between the tackles, contact balance, breaking a bunch of tackles mentality they're looking for. And oh, by the way, he had 61 catches the last 2 years. And I think that's really what jumped out to the Seahawks. We'll talk about the other running back they picked as well later, but they got running backs that can catch the football just as well as they can run the football to complement Ken Walker III. And I feel like this running back room is much better now. And this guy's going to get a lot of carries in the offense where they run the ball a lot.
No, exactly. I think he's going to get a lot of carries. As you said, I think he's going to get a lot of reception opportunities. I think he's going to get a lot of touchdowns. And so the people who are fantasy football enthusiasts out there, look, Ken Walker is unbelievable talent. We all saw that a year ago. But I think that the Seattle worries that they might, just overwhelm him by asking him to take 20, 25 carries per game. And then if you are fortunate enough to be in playoff consideration towards the end of the season, you're going to run your rookie running or your second-year running back into a wall, So be able to protect him a little bit, especially in short yard situations. Have a bigger back that can kind of be that finisher for you. That's exactly where Charbonnet excels. So I think Charbonnet is talented enough to be Seattle's starter should anything ever happen to Ken Walker, or if they're going up against a defense that might be a little bit more vulnerable to more of an in between the tackles rather than outside the tackles type of attack. I think Ken Walker can do it all. He proved that again last year. I think Charbonnet can too. That to me is one of the most exciting elements about it. And I love that you mentioned kind of the idea that this is a controversial pick in some people's minds. There are some people out there who just think that the analytics crowd, who just think that running backs with, top 50, top 60 selections is just for crazy people. Well, that's those crazy people who walk around kind of weighed down by Super Bowl rings, because the teams that consistently get quality production at the running back position, however you acquire them, those are the ones that win. And Pete Carroll knows that as well as anybody. That's why I thought that this pick was as predictable as it was.
Well, obviously you predicted it, so certainly got to give you kudos on that one. He's a guy that I did expect late second, early third was probably where he's going to fall. You have the 2 running backs ahead of him go in the first 12 picks, though, and then number 3 running back suddenly has a much better chance of getting picked earlier than projected. Let's get to the day 3 picks, because there was so much angst from Seahawk fans. You could sense it on social media when I was typing up articles from the media draft room. Fans like, why aren't we picking defensive tackles? Why aren't we picking offensive linemen? The Seahawks, they were saying, patience, people. We are going to get this taken care of. And they did so in waves on day 3. Let's talk the 2 fourth-round picks real quick. Anthony Bradford from LSU at pick 108. They got it from the Broncos. one of your favorite guards that was a fast rising prospect in this class. The more film I watch, at least as a run blocker, I am extremely intrigued to see where he fits in this offense because he does have good mobility for a 334-pound guard. So they're getting that lateral quickness that they're looking for while also having a guy that really can blow people up in the line of scrimmage and get downhill, open up run lanes for Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet. Pass protection, I think, is going to be something that's going to be a little bit of a work in progress, and maybe that's what holds him back competing against Phil Haynes from day one. But you get him, and then you get Cameron Young at pick 123, the massive defensive tackle from Mississippi State, another player that I know you were very high on, who had great run-stuffing production. Seattle needs that anywhere they can find it. Not much of a pass rusher at all at the college level, but there may be some untapped potential there come to Seattle if he can be coached up because he is fairly athletic at 304 pounds.
He is athletic. And again, he's got those heavy hands we talked about before with Derick Hall. And, you know, there's elements of his game that remind me, Corbin, a little bit of Jaron Reed. And Jaron Reed was also perceived to be basically just a run-stepping guy at Alabama when Seattle selected him in the second round several years ago. And, of course, he's wound up becoming one of the better all-around defensive tackles. Maybe not the point, of course, of being a Pro Bowler and things like that, but still can get it done as a pass rusher as well as a run defender. And that's where I think Cameron Young can provide the Seahawks. As you mentioned, he was a player that, you know, I was high on, and I've been kind of touting him a little bit. He was on my Rangs gang, and that's my list where I'm not necessarily evaluating specifically for the Seahawks, but for all 32 NFL teams. And Young is one of my favorite defensive linemen in this class. And when I say that he's a favorite player of mine, I don't mean that like, oh, that means that, you know, this guy is really, really good. But I've been doing this for a while. You know, and so if I see a player that I think has some of the traits that maybe don't pop off right on tape, oh, this guy's got, or right on paper, this guy's got this many sacks or this much, you know, production or this much of a workout numbers or whatever. It's just you get a feel for a guy, the way that they make plays, the consistency, the drive. That to me is one of the things that I think stands out in Cameron Young's tape, and why I do expect, even as a fifth-round pick, that he's going to wind up getting some pretty significant playing time for Seattle. At least the way it appears right now. We'll see if Seattle is able to bring in some other veterans. You know, John Schneider kind of left open the idea of maybe bringing back an Al Woods or a Poona Ford. We'll see. But if not, the way it stands right now, Cameron Young looks like he is going to be getting an awful lot of playing time. Now, I don't necessarily expect that to be the case for the guard that you mentioned a couple of moments before that in Anthony Bradford. Now, Bradford, I really like Bradford's game. Just a massive, mauling guy, 6'5", 330 pounds, as you mentioned. What I was so intrigued by is the 40-yard dash, the 10-yard splits, 1.66 seconds, 10-yard split, Corbin. Again, it's the kind of opposite with Cameron Young. I'm going to cite his power, his toughness. With Bradford, I see a guy who not only is just a physically massive man, but also has kind of some underrated athleticism that if you just kind of develop that a little bit, I really think that he could be not only a starter, but a pretty high-level starter at that. He just needs a little bit of time. He was only basically a one-year starter at LSU. And so I think that he maybe came into the NFL a year early. Maybe that's one of the reasons why he was available where he was. I thought Seattle would address the line of scrimmage earlier. That's why I didn't project Bradford as a guy in the final mock draft. But in terms of a guy who fits their style, in terms of size, in terms of athletic ability, in terms of big-time program, I think that Bradford is one of the guys that absolutely makes sense for Seattle.
All right, let's get to the fifth round now. Pete Carroll, John Schneider, they love picking Michigan men. This is the second time they've drafted multiple Michigan players in the same draft. They did it with Lano Hill as well as Amara Darboh in 2017. That didn't work out for Seattle with either one of those two players. But this feels a little bit different. We'll see what ends up happening here. But the Wolverines have some fantastic players in the trenches. And that was one of the reasons they were able to get to the college football playoff. And then in a 4-pick span, Seattle gets Mike Morris, who they're going to be playing at defensive end. He gained 20 pounds between the combine and getting drafted, but he was in the 290s at Michigan. And so this was good weight. That's where the Seahawks want him to be. So he's going to be playing defensive end, a lot of 3-tech, 4-eye responsibilities on the defensive line. had almost double-digit sacks last year and a 20.7% pressure rate. So that is really good for a player that plays a lot in the interior. Seattle's going to be counting on him being a guy that can come in at least on pass rushing downs early and get after the quarterback. And then on the other side, Olu Oluwatimi, the center from Michigan, only played 1 year there, but he was the Remington Award winner, the Outland Award winner. So he was the best interior offensive lineman in terms of awards. He was a standout of the Senior Bowl, 3,500 plus snaps at the position. He knows every scheme. He's seen every scheme on defense. And so that gives him a great chance to battle Evan Brown. That's actually a competition I cannot wait to see happen in the trenches between those two, because I like Evan Brown, but Oluwatimi is a very experienced prospect that, quite frankly, I did not think was going to fall to the 5th round.
I thought he might be available at that point, but I really was expecting Seattle to address these areas of concern, the line of scrimmage earlier. And so when Seattle, of course, did not, and they chose to address other positions, I thought, okay, this is about as low as you can go because, as you said, I mean, he is about as proven as it gets. I mean, this is Seattle drafted a bunch of 4-year starters. This is a 5-year starter. I mean, that's so rare, of course. But talk about pro-ready. When you have been successful at Michigan, won the Remington Award, the Joe Moore Award as the nation's best offensive line, which he at the center position deserves an awful lot of credit for that. A team captain, despite coming into it, late in his career, only had spent the 1 year at Michigan, was a team captain as well as a Remington Award finalist at Virginia the year before that. Again, his success in multiple different offenses for coaches that I am a big fan of. I mean, hey, I understand that Seattle has not always had the greatest of relationships with Jim Harbaugh, but at the same time, the man is a heck of a coach and produces NFL talent like it's going out of business. And so I think that this is, again, a player that makes a lot of sense for the Seahawks. And then going back to Mike Morris, when Seattle made that selection, and I'm sitting there looking at it, and 275 pounds running a 5-second flat. I'm thinking, okay, I don't like this selection as much as people might think. But when he got on to his press conference, and you mentioned the fact that he came in, played at Michigan at 290 pounds. When he weighed into the combine 275, and I thought he is not a small guy. This is a naturally long, big man, broad shoulders, long arms, the whole package. He deserves it. He needs to be on the defensive line. This is not a speed rusher. And so that, for me, was what I was so excited about, is to hear that he had added that 20 pounds, that Seattle specifically asked him to add that 20 pounds, confirmed, got a picture text basically from him on the day of the draft to make sure that he was the height or the weight that they wanted him at and that he was following what they asked him to do. To me, that just kind of says that Seattle definitely has a plan for him. I love the fact that you mentioned the pass rush win rate. This is the guy that basically took over for Aiden Hutchinson, the number 2 overall pick a year ago, and put up similar numbers. Was one of the most dominant defensive linemen in all the Big Ten last season. Definitely one of their leaders on defense. So again, the 5th round, I think that is a potential steal. I think Seattle's got a lot of bodies along the defensive line. I'm really curious to see where Morris fits in. But I think that there's going to be a lot of people in Seattle who consider themselves Michigan men after Seattle's latest run on the Wolverine prospects.
We've got 2 more selections we're going to break down. Now, those of you that are watching on YouTube, I am going to be muting Rob just in case the alarm in his classroom goes off here in the next couple minutes, and then we'll let him come back in to explain his thoughts on these 2 picks real quick. But Seattle in the 6th round, pick 199. They get Jarek Reed II, one of their top 30 visits. That was another theme to me. They drafted a bunch of dudes that they had in for official visits this time around. So you got Devon Witherspoon. There were a few other guys that had visits out to Seattle as well. They get Jarek Reed, a player who was criminally under-recruited out of high school, was a first-team All-State guy, no offers, had to go JUCO. Nobody's looking at him for the draft, and then the Seahawks send a scout to the pro day for New Mexico. And like, who the heck is this dude? They watched the film, and as John Schneider called him, basing off the Elf movie, he plays like an angry little elf, and had the entire media room laughing with that. I loved it. So apparently he is a South Pole elf, those of you that have seen the movie. But this guy flies around the field, 4.46 speed, 38-inch vertical, has started games at slot and both safety positions, can play all over the place. He's a really fun prospect that I think has some developmental potential to be a guy that maybe Quandre Diggs down the road could pass the torch to. And so he's a guy that's got some defensive flexibility. I think right now he's going to be battling for a special team spot because of the talent and depth that they've got at safety. But there's no question, Rob, that this guy is a true Swiss Army knife, can play everything on special teams as well. To get him at 198 and then to get another running back in Kenny McIntosh, who was on the national championship team at Georgia and caught the second most passes of any running back in all of college football. He was upset to fall to the 7th round. I had a 3rd round grade on the guy. I thought he was a top 5 running back in this class. For Seattle to get him in the 7th round and a player like Derick Reed, who really went under the radar, and the Seahawks tried to make it that way on purpose so they could draft him. There's a reason I think the biggest smile John Schneider had on his face the entire weekend was talking about these two players.
100% agree with you. I think that when you look at, I just like the contrast between small school Derick Reed, who was a playmaker, and then Kenny McIntosh at Georgia, as you said, 2-time defending national champion, and just all the success that he and other backs from Georgia have had. To me, it's just kind of a fun contrast that way. With Reed specifically, the fact that he only had 1 interception this past season, Corbin, I think that there might be some Seahawks fans out there who saw that and thought, oh, this is not going to be the ball hawk. Instead, he was actually very productive in terms of, getting his hands on the football over his college career. And there was one interception in particular that I saw that really, I think, shows off the instincts, the closing speed, the ball skills to warrant that mentioning, like a possible handoff from Quandre Diggs to Derick Reed in the future, possibly being that the long-term planet-free safety. It was an interception against the University of Nevada where he is running and, the ball is being thrown over his head. And he basically makes a one-arm kind of Willie Mays kind of catch over his shoulder. That's just a spectacular catch. And so I was really intrigued by that, just the ball skills, the speed again. And again, just the angry little elf reference is kind of comical, but I think it's also appropriate because you see the physicality, just the nastiness, the want-to that Derick Reed provides, and that just screams special teams. So that's where I think that we're going to see him at first. But again, really excited about his upside. And again, with McIntosh, to me, he is a little bit similar to what Seattle lost with Travis Homer. And, those of you who are watching on YouTube might be able to see the biceps are already starting to grow in there with Kenny McIntosh. Who knows if he's going to develop those Robert Turbin-like pythons that Travis Homer left Seattle with. But when Travis Homer first was drafted by Seattle out of the University of Miami, he was kind of a somewhat slimmer, kind of an upright runner like McIntosh, more of a glider, more of a slasher in that he's not a short, squatty kind of a back like a Ken Walker. And he's certainly not the 6'1", 215-pounder that Jacques Charbonnet is. To me, it's the fact that you have this whole assortment of different running back styles that I think is going to make Seattle that much more dynamic, that much more versatile on offense this year. And so I'm excited about it. I mean, obviously we liked Seattle's running back room a year ago. I am just as excited about the running back talent that they have this year as well.
And he can play special teams. He can line up in the slot. So this is a 7th rounder that has a boulder on his shoulder now because he did not expect to fall that far. And so for him to get that opportunity to come to Seattle now, I think there's a real chance that he and Charbonnet can both play significant snaps. And DJ Dallas, you better be ready because this is going to be a very competitive running back group now for the Seahawks. We're going to have a lot more time to talk about all 10 of these players, starting with the first rounders on tomorrow's episode. You can follow me on Twitter, Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and other major podcast platforms to ensure you don't miss a single episode. We'll get to those first round picks tomorrow, breaking down where they fit, looking at the depth chart at their respective positions heading into 2023. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening and go Hawks.